Theodotos. Theodotos. Rob and Jeff and guests galore. Theodotos are back for more. Theodotos.
All right, welcome back to Theodotos, episode 3. I'm Jeff Lamar. This is my co-host, Rob Sharp. Rob, say hi to the folks.
Hello.
It's a very, very demure hello for a manly man like you, Rob. Tell the people what we're doing today.
We in our last, I don't really want to call it a political episode, but we did have an episode pre-election where we kind of talked about the Christian nation, the idea of being a Christian nation, and how then should we live as Christian people in this nation that in many ways seems like a post-Christian nation. So that was kind of our episode last time, in a geopolitical or something like a historical, philosophical sort of sensibility, a mixture of, in our country, a mixture of Judaic, God-centered moral law and Roman legal political structure with further checks and balances added in. And you can go to Hillsdale College and take their free classes and learn about the foundations of the country. But anyways, we're kind of coming at it from that perspective.
For a
And
Theodotos.
did I throw in too many words there? Okay, it is. Yeah. And I'm definitely reading off of my notes here because we've got 2 special guests and we've covered a lot of ground, and now we are post-election and covering more ground. So I want to make sure that we, try to frame things correctly. Anyways, so that's, as far as a New Testament theological approach to individual, family, a city or nation, when we're talking about being a Christian nation, we sort of covered that ground and sort of came to rest on the fact that the idea of a Christian nation is kind of a difficult subject because, in a geopolitical sense, you can have a nation that seems to identify more as Christian than Muslim or Buddhist or whatever. So in that sense, Christian nation, I think we fit that description. But if we're talking about a New Testament biblical foundation, people that are surrendered to Christ and following him, it becomes very much more individual. And it's very hard to say that we're a Christian nation if everybody in the country is not kind of following Jesus. So that was kind of some of the ground that we covered. And, how then should we live? How, as Christians, how do we reach and connect with a culture as Christian people? So that was kind of the ground that we covered.
And our guest for that episode was Dale Hopp, who's back with us.
Mr. Dale Hopp.
Which is exciting. Why don't you tell folks
Definitely.
who's joining the 2 of us and Dale this week?
I'm sorry.
I said, why don't you? I wasn't talking. It's fine. Why don't you tell people joining us and Dale this week?
So Dale is joining us this week, and also we have a Danny Short with us. So I can see our panel now. Is everybody on video?
Everybody's on. We're doing good.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. We've had some technical difficulties. I didn't want to make any assumptions. So let me start with some introductions. So we have with us this Danny Short person.
He's not but you should rephrase that.
Well, I don't want to cut you short. What were you saying?
Yeah. We starting this again?
Okay. Well, let me give Danny a proper introduction.
Sure.
Here. He is a husband, a father, a friend. And he is a person with a degree in business management. He is the president of Floyd County Council. He's served in ministry capacities at Northside Christian Church, and he's a personal friend of all of ours. And so it's definitely a pleasure to have you on, Mr. Danny Short.
Thanks for having me.
And I will give a short I'm sorry, Jeff.
No, I was just going to say, it's good to see Danny. Good to have him with us. I think we said early on when we were even talking about this podcast that Danny would make a great guest, no matter what we talked about. We talked about Dale being a guest. I think the problem is we know a lot of interesting people. And so we want to talk about these things from the perspective of, when we're talking about faith, we're talking about where our boots meet the ground, and what that looks like, because politics has been looming large in the picture right now in this season. It feels right to address those things, which is why we had Dale on last time. But I think, post-election, we kind of wanted to bring Danny into the mix and ask some questions and, discuss some of the relevant topics at hand. But it's good to have Danny on. Good to have Dale back for sure. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I didn't mean to take it away from you, Rob.
No problem at all. I was just going to mention, as far as boots on the ground, that is why I wear flip-flops, because I try to avoid any sort of boots on the ground. So let me,
Flip-flops are political conversation. Well,
I don't wear pajamas though. So you'll never see me, out in Walmart in pajamas. So, to my credit, I hope.
then you won't be welcome.
We're very thankful, Rob.
Let me give Dale a quick reintroduction. We have full intro in our last episode, but a quick summary. Many years service in ministry, father, friend, and he's well read, well instructed on many subjects, and that's why his input is so valuable here. So with that, let's get into it. I think anyone who lives on planet Earth is aware of the battle that took place here in November 2024. Mike Tyson fought with Jake Paul, an event akin to something like a salsa dance on Dancing with the Stars. You might equate that to. Oh, and a presidential election also happened, so that's more to the subject matter. So I figured we could talk about that some. I'm just going to throw out some questions. And this is to Danny and Dale, and me and Jeff, we're just here to kind of facilitate and throw in some input here and there. But we'd really like to hear from Danny and Dale on this. So I'm just going to throw this out to both of you. Give us a brief summary of the impact of the election, the outcome of the election on you personally, and the impact for the country going forward. How you feel like this election outcome has impacted you personally, and how you feel like the impact of this election is going to affect the country going forward. So let's start with Danny. And
now, see, I was going to have them
hit me
out, like have a knife fight or something to determine,
or at least a thumb war,
something. Yeah, but we'll start with Danny.
So personally, I was pleased with the outcome, and I feel like it's kind of given myself a sense of, I'll say, confidence in at least the next few years for economic reasons and for stability reasons. as far as around the world goes. As far as our country, I think it's as polarized as ever, and even with what most people consider a decisive victory, there, there's still two sides that are entrenched and dug in their positions, and I don't see that improving a great deal. But I think there's an opportunity here, especially for the next 2 years until the midterms, to solidify and make some hay with America's choice. And I hope that time frame isn't wasted as it was, 8 years ago.
And hopefully it won't take 2 years for the new president to get his cabinet installed.
That too.
Yeah.
Dale?
I think Danny's either posing or he's frozen.
Dale.
Oh, that's frozen.
Yeah, Dale also looks frozen. There you go. Now you're clear. And there's Dale.
Okay, we're good. There we go.
We
We're
wait those
updated.
moments out, I guess.
Yeah. All right, Dale.
Well, I'm ready. I think it's going to be huge. Because
Huge.
if we could drain the swamp, actually, right? I'm going to be very optimistic here. If we could actually drain the swamp, which is what I believe that we're set out to do, and if we could bring justice back to the rule of law, I know it could take a long time, and I understand Danny's pessimism, but it's going to be hugely big. It's going to be a giant impact, biggest impact ever. It's going to be big. It's going to be huge. We're going to get tired of winning, right? Come on, come with me. Yeah.
That
See,
is
I'm a
interesting.
Detroit Lions fan too, so you know what's going to happen for the next couple of years? We're going to get knocked down. We're going to bite some kneecaps. Come back up. I really believe it this time. I don't think Trump knew what he was doing last time. I don't. I think he trusted too many of the wrong people, and I don't think he's going to do that this time. If people aren't holding the line, they'll be out. I really believe it. And he doesn't care what anybody says anymore. He can't ever run again. So there's a huge impact there. Now, personally, I'm obviously having a little fun with this, but, I believe in a government that's based on God-given rights to people, right? That constitutional government. It's superior over any other government. And any move towards that gives us hope, just like Danny said, that we have sight of these things again, that it's possible that this takeover that we've experienced to a large extent over the last several years is actually being turned back by the people. And that's the key. If it's still the legitimate government that we started out to set out to have. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Go ahead, bro.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you.
No, I was just going to say that is a lot of statements in a very short time. So we're going to get into some of those things for sure going forward. And I would like to say that, and this is not a disclaimer against what Dale is sharing here, because there is, a natural excitement around, positive change and things that we're hopeful for. And if you're listening to this and you're watching this, then it's probably not going to take you too long to figure out that we are a bunch of conservative Christian people. But I would also say that, everybody is absolutely encouraged and welcome to hang out here. This is let's call it a safe place for people with ideas and opinions. And so if you're watching this and listening to this, then just know that we're not against you. If you hold a different opinion, So, but we're also we have some very visionary people here that are excited about what could be and where things might go here. So we'll try to balance our victory dances as best we can going through this and make sure that we leave room for everybody that is joining in on this too. So that, yeah, no, that's awesome. Dale, I wanted to revisit in our previous episode, you said something really interesting. You're talking about the liberty found in our founding documents would enable a Christian and non-Christian alike to pursue their dreams. And I thought that was profound. And you said we were talking about, okay, I asked the question, if we become as a nation disobedient to the tenets of God, sort of like in the same sense that Israel became disobedient to God, would we lose that grace, that blessing that God had put upon our nation? So so part of the blessing, to your point that I feel like you were making, and correct me if I'm wrong, is found in the documents of our foundation. Do you see those foundations solidified by this last election?
I believe, like I said, I think it gives us hope that the people are waking up to what has been happening to our country, how it's moved to it's not a legislature anymore. It's become this giant political machine where people are hired by a political party even, or at least people in power, to implement policy that dictates how we live. And those are things that originally in our founding documents were going to be something that the people were going to be responsible for, a legislative government, a rule of law. So that's what I was trying to say. If the kneecap thing, was a little too rough, I was just messing around. I think we could get along.
I hear you. All right. Well, let me throw out a question to Danny, and this is a long lead in, so patience.
Buckle
please.
up is what.
So politics on a local level. As a friend of yours, I've gotten to peek into your campaign and administration. I've talked with you about your fights, your challenges, victories, and setbacks. I know you as a man of vision, a fighter, a man of integrity. Even before politics, you were to me a man that I would describe as a pillar, a man of faith, action, and involvement. Over the last decade or so, we saw the somewhat featureless blanket of national politics sort of explode into a focused regional and local fight, for lack of a better term. School board meetings, election integrity in particular counties, etc. So we live in an area of the country that generally leans red, conservative, Republican, if you want to say. But we have some areas that lean blue, like Louisville and Indianapolis. So I'm curious, how have you seen the political landscape change in Floyd County? Has the fight intensified in any way over the years, or can more conservative leaning people rest easy and skip the trip to the voting booths?
Well, thank you for the kind words. But I would never encourage anyone to skip the voting booth. I vote for someone if they're unopposed. To me, it's one of the foundations of our society, and we should never say things are going well enough that I don't need to go vote. The first part of that question, local politics is every bit as political as state and national politics. Some of the worst and nastiest politics that I've seen has been on school board stuff. And believe that or not, it's from the very bottom of local politics on up. It is, it's a mess, and it's entrenched. And our county, Floyd County, is in the unincorporated county is deep red. We swept all county elections this year, and it's still hyper political, and it has a lot to do with what trickles down from the national level, where you must choose a side. It goes to social media and a real quick news cycle, and people will say things online that they wouldn't say to you in person. So it's the issues may be on a smaller scale, but the politics of it is just as bad as you'll find anywhere.
So have you seen things intensify over the years? I guess what I'm kind of highlighting, at least what I've understood, there's been kind of a shift. Again, me and Jeff have talked about like politics and stuff when we were kids. Things seemed very national, and it seemed very kind of homogenous, kind of a featureless landscape of politicians behind closed doors on a professional national level. And it seems like over the last 8-10 years that we've seen a shift to where there's a very real fight more locally, at least that we've become more aware of, to where people are getting involved grassroots level. They're getting involved in the fight in the school board, like we were talking about school board meetings, election integrity and things like that. Have you seen an intensification of the importance of local elections and people becoming aware of what's happening locally?
To some degree I have, and I think it's issue specific. So with school boards, people started getting upset or paying more attention when it was a hot button topic, like, trans athletes on school teams or using school bathrooms, or, different situations that pertain to schools that are a hot button issue. For us on council, we see more people get involved when it's an expenditure or a tax or something that would, affect them directly that otherwise they wouldn't. But once that issue is passed and it's behind us, it dies back down. So I think it's very issue specific. There's not a lot of we have a few regulars at our council meetings, but it's not. I wish there was more. I wish there was more involvement, because that's the way it should be handled. But it's very issue specific on a county and a local level.
Well, to piggyback off of that,
interesting.
I wanted to ask, just from where I'm sitting, it seems like this, what Rob's talking about, seeing the more and more people getting combative about their politics, more and more aggressiveness toward one another, that sort of thing. To me, at least, and please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but to me, it seems like that kind of began, or at least intensified, once identity politics sort of became the flavor of the day. That because identity politics boils everything down to something that's personal, that's about me. It's not about policy anymore. It's about you hating me. It's about you not being for me. That once those sort of things kind of took hold and took root in society, then it's really hard to say agree to disagree, because everything is taken as a personal assault. Whereas when I was a kid, I might hear my parents say, well, I don't care for that guy. I'm not going to vote for him. I don't care about it. I don't care for his policies. Or I never heard them talk about anybody the way that I hear the right talk about Biden or the left talk about Trump. Like, it's very aggressive compared to what I grew up with. And I feel like it has to be rooted in that identity politics side of it, because that to me is something that really sprang up like a weed in the last 10, 15 years. Would you agree?
Right. Yes, and I think a lot of it goes back to I'll call it focus groups, or politicians, especially on a national level, pay a lot of money to find out what issues people move on. What gets them out of their house and to go vote, and they do poll after poll to figure that out, and then they just harp on it. They just attack that point, and whatever it takes to make that the hyper focused issue for you. They'll do it on a variety of issues, but you pick up the one that's important to you. And I hear people say all the time that negative campaigning doesn't work. Well, that's not true, because if it didn't work, you wouldn't see politicians using it every election cycle. It works. And what it does is it locks you in to the person that you want to vote for, or who you're going to vote for, because it reassures you that the other person is bad because they did this, whatever it was. So politicians know what they're doing when they run ads like that. They've got data to back it up. They know the top issues for people, and they know it's 48 to 48 on a national level. They're fighting for that 4% in the middle, and they will cater to, and they will focus like a laser on issues. And if it's identity politics, if whatever it is, they will spend all their money on that. And it works. Most of the time it works.
So Dale, let me ask you, if in this kind of landscape where everybody is taking things more personally than ever and taking every disagreement as an attack, essentially, in a lot of cases, how do we as believers navigate that to keep our arms open and hearts open for the people that we may strongly disagree with, that may take everything that we believe to be some sort of personal war against who they are and what they stand for? How do we position ourselves as a community of believers to address that sort of aggression and to still be welcoming as the church?
That is a really good question, because it's going to be difficult to stand for truth and not be offensive to people who want to rewrite what truth is. So I think on a personal level, I struggle with this with my own kids. So I'm just being honest there. My son and I had an argument the other day about stuff that really didn't matter, personality stuff. I know a lot of people that didn't really like Trump, but they voted against the alternative. And we're seeing some of the stuff that Danny talks about too, whether it be on a local or the issues, this trans thing. I think it moved people. I think that there are people that are tired of that. I think the economy, it moved people. They went away from policies. So that's on the political side. But as far as on the church side, I think you get into a really complicated issue, because if 40% of Americans are going to become oppositional to the truth that's declared by God and His Word, we're just going to have to prepare to be offensive. It doesn't mean we have to be offensive. It's just that it's going to be offensive to stand for the truth. I mean, unless you disagree, I'm curious that you brought it up. That's my position. I think it's going to be offensive, and we shouldn't make those micro arguments into the basis of our conflict. It should be the basics of the gospel and what the Word of God says about people's behavior.
Right.
Even, right? I mean, it's in there, a lot of it. I'm called out,
and
by
I think we'd
it, so
probably
I decide whether I agree.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we'd probably all agree that we can't separate our faith from how we form our political opinions. But at the same time, they can't be so conflated that we can't do the work of the church because of political rifts and political disagreements. There are, I think maybe it's hard for us sometimes from where we're sitting to believe that there could be godly men and women sitting on the other side of the aisle who love God with all their heart, but see things very differently than we do. Maybe because of where they are,
Different
maybe because of where they
conclusions.
are in their walk with God. Maybe it's a maturity thing. Maybe they would look at us and say, well, if you were a little more mature spiritually, you'd sit where we are. But that's an issue where, as brothers and sisters in Christ, we need to find some unity, even if we see the world or America very differently. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't stand where we stand politically for what we believe is right, for what we believe preserves what's good about this grand experiment. That's my side.
So I've got kind of a segue into something Jeff and I have talked about, and this might be an interesting time to bring this up. Again, apologies for the long lead in. For Dale and Danny here. So Jeff and I have talked about our natural human tendency to see greener grass on the other side. And to long for those good old days and simpler times. We know from world history and from God's word that we human folk are fallen and therefore tend to war, and we tend towards general horribleness. Just looking through world history, and even the Bible does not try to, shuffle that under the rug. So one of the things that we wrestle with in the question of have things gotten worse? So there's a couple different sides of the argument, I guess you could take. So argument one might be something like, since the beginning, we have fought over religious liberty, individual rights, taxation, social programs or charity, social justice, and how free is free. We've been through civil war, world wars, social upheavals, riots, assassinations and attempts of assassinations, civil rights protests. So maybe the last decade isn't as crazy as it feels in the moment. So that would be one argument, that we might feel like everything's gone insane, but looking back through the corridors of history, taking everything into account, we might come to the conclusion that, oh, well, I mean, I guess anybody in any age might come to the same conclusion. But as you look through history, you might come to the conclusion that, well, I guess there's always been crazy times and upheavals and stuff. So, but another argument, one might argue that prayer and the Bible have been thrown out of school. Science has relegated faith to an echo of what used to be relevant. The size of the federal government and the military industrial complex seems to be larger and healthier than ever, even global. Our economy is tied to the global economy more than ever before. Morality, philosophy, spirituality, our nation has shifted. So Dale talked about this in the last episode, kind of mapping out the rise and triumph of the modern self. So from this perspective, one might conclude that things are actually different or worse. So Dale and Danny, either one of you jump in on this. Have things changed, or is this just par for the course or a cycle? If things are really worse or different, can we course correct back to something better, or can we only forge ahead? Easy question. Go for it.
Yeah. Well, let me start off and say I added that book to my Amazon cart after the last episode, so I'm going to check that one out. I'm going to put it in line. I've got about 5 ahead of it, I think. But
You're welcome to borrow mine.
my wife said no more books. Yeah. So things have always been bad. You can take it back as far as you want to go. I mean, biblical times, morality, like, Sodom and Gomorrah, battles where they would go in and kill everyone in a city, just wipe it out and loot it. And, so, in that respect, maybe we're a little bit better, but, you can do some quick history, the turn of the 20th century. There were some political campaigns that would make people blush today. Some of the, names that they called each other. And, but, the one thing that was missing was, kind of something that we used to call in the corporate world specialization. Now, you've got people who specialize in sending out those texts to your phone about political candidates. How'd they get my number? Well, pop-up ads. I mean, they're so specialized now in keeping it in front of you, and keeping the frenzy going. So, the second part of that question, have we shifted? I think it is a soft shift, but it's more desperation to me.
Huh.
People pushing the envelope to see what they can get away with. 20 years ago, it was, want to legalize gay marriage. And now it's, 10 years ago, it was, another step further, and now it's full blown, we've elected the first trans person to Congress. And that is wild to me. So I count that as a shift, but it's also pushing the envelope like Elvis did in the 50s. How much hip shaking can I get away with? So there's always going to be that group that pushes the envelope. This is just a weird way of a weird branch to go out on in my mind, but it's so it is worse in some ways. And I think there has been a morality shift, but we've all, like you said earlier, Rob, we have always been fallen. And what was the term you used? I can't remember now, but like
Cray.
Yeah, humans have always been crazy and
Messy.
and I think, yeah, and
So I guess, the other part of that question too is, looking back and gosh, I've got so many friends, and myself included, that tend to look back and on the past and say it was a better time, a simpler time, things were, whatever. So in that sense, I think that our human response to uncomfortable change in the present is to figure out some way to revert things back. So is there a way back if things have changed, if things have gotten worse, is there a way to go back, or is there only forging ahead? How do you see that?
Well, let's talk about back. Just that word. Did we hear that word at all in this campaign for president? Absolutely. We heard take back. We heard go
Golden
back.
age.
We heard we're never going back. Right? Going back to
Yeah.
what? Oh, to what Danny was saying
To
too,
what?
as far as a political philosophy. We could talk about that. We're going to go back to a political philosophy. To me, the political philosophy that we need to be striving to go back to is mutual benefit. Okay.
Hmm.
The concept of unity of purpose, to be free. Again, this is not going to be to the gospel message, because we know that in the gospel, you choose to offer yourself either to sin, you become a slave to sin, or to righteousness.
Uh-oh. I think we might have lost
Well, let's and it come back.
Dale. Let's see if he comes back in here.
He was
Yep.
on a roll too.
He was cooking. Man.
Do you want me to end the recording real quick before he comes back on so that we make sure we got it?
I think we're doing okay. Everybody else
We are,
is
but
rolling fine here. I think you might have got
There
a
we go.
text. There we go.
Hey,
All right, Dale. You were
I've already
cooking.
Record.
You said something about bringing us donuts, and that's the last I heard.
well, just the fact that as far as a political, if I was there, the goal I think would be to get back to unity of purpose as a
Mutual
nation,
benefit.
for mutual benefit. But
Mhm.
but I think also in the sense of when we get to morality, which we're saying we're not allowed to legislate morality, and I think that's nonsense, because whatever we legislate is going to have a moral value. So defending the unborn, even though it's a moral thing.
All right, pause. That's very interesting. Wait, would you repeat that? About the legislating morality. What were you saying there?
Well, what I'm saying is whether you legislate for liberty to violate God's rules, or whether you legislate for upholding of you can't murder people, this is morality that you're legislating. It just goes to the degree that you're going to legislate it. Now, like we talked about with Roger
Interesting.
Williams, legislating the first four of the foundationals of the commandment to make people follow God is not within our reason. But as a nation, we were founded on the concept that we could legislate the value of our society, that those things that were valuable to us for mutual benefit could be legislated, and actually should be legislated through the three departments of government, right? Primarily through law giving, through the legislative branch, then execution, and of course the judicial to decide those things. I think going back to that is within reach, because people are waking up to the woke corruption of telling people how to think and how they have to actually think. Since most people our age have read 1984, have been exposed to it. And these kind of things are still in our culture. And there's a dying generation possibly that will fight before and hopefully make some ground. And I'm not sure that it's possible, but I want to be an optimist.
Okay.
Because going back is what we have to do. We
here's-
have to go back somewhat. We can't just go forward. There's nothing to go forward to if you're not going somewhere.
Oh, that is a very good point. Forward to what? But here's one of the things that kind of pops into my head as I'm thinking about that is the metaphor of getting the toothpaste back into the tube. So if LGBTQ, etc., has become paralleled with, equated with civil rights, and just the other shifts and changes that we've seen in the culture is how do you see dealing with something like that as far as going back? How does that look going?
Okay.
How
Well,
does that
I
look?
think
I mean, legislatively.
legislatively, it will have to be legislatively. So you're going to have the will of the people being exercised. And then what we have to hope for in that regard, because we do have a foundation of this, correct? We have a foundation
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
justice and law in this country based on a Christian ethic, if you want to call it that. So the pattern, if you want to go back to Sodom and Gomorrah and all these other Bible stories, is that God's plan is for renewal, and renewal almost always comes from remembrance. God's word always calls us to remember what it was that we were brought into and from. So if we can call to remembrance, maybe we can see a revival, a renewal of these values up to why are we valuing that over one opinion in a school district being able to decide who gets to go in and out of the girls' bathroom. That's
Interesting.
your new Carl Truman Rise of the Modern Self. But people feel like that's a tyranny. People are waking up to the tyranny of that. That's what I believe. And they're going, we don't want that. So then where are they going to go? Then now, to your point, Jeff, the church is called upon, aren't they? To call to remembrance the things that were worth building on. So, I mean, does that answer your question, Ralph?
Absolutely. I think that's, I mean, that's exciting to think about it in that capacity, but I would say that that's different than going back. I think that, when people are looking back at the good old days and black and white and Andy Griffith and whatever, it's like, you can't go back. You can't get it back in the bottle. You can't like reset something and legislate that everybody is now going to, think a different way. But I think that what you're saying is actually very encouraging and forward looking, even though we're talking about foundations. We're talking about, the idea of ideas and going back to the Bible and the promises of God and his goodness. And you're like, what you're talking about is a renewal. And I think in your words, being refreshed and renewed on these foundations, which is not going back to a particular like Norman Rockwell painting of what we think of as the ideal, great American, heritage or whatever. It's actually forward looking. It's actually looking at a living God who has made promises that we can walk in. So I think that's very interesting. So it is, you could call it going back, but I think it's not looking backwards, reminiscing about something that we had that was better back in the day, 8 tracks and phonographs and, that kind of a thing. I think what you're suggesting is a renewal and understanding the foundations, understanding the promises of God.
Yeah,
and
a
who he is.
rejuvenation. When Dale, you brought up the abortion argument, and a lot of what you hear there, and a lot of what we have heard post-election, and really post-Roe being overturned, is we're not going back. We're not going back to that. We're not. But it's not about going back. It's about taking a stand for what's true and right, which might seem from, I guess, a certain perspective like going back. But the point is that, I don't think any of these laws are perfect, right? There's a lot of state to state laws that are kind of lacking nuance, and there's a lot of room to have discussion and to figure out where do we stand on this. But yes,
Oklahoma's the worst.
But when it comes to something like that, we have to do the most good that we can. And that means, if that means overturning Roe, that's step one. It's not the end result. It's not how things come to an end. It's how we start saving lives where we can. It's about how we step into this situation. So we're saving, like, that's step one. We've got to also provide for moms that are in bad situations that have, you know, situations that we as men can't really fathom, but they need help. And on my side of that, I say that's where the church needs to step in. But I'm also okay with government assistance in some of those cases, as long as we're not making our living having babies, right? There's nuance there. It, there's complexity. And I think we tend to want to boil things down to this really simple form and then just leave it there. We got Roe vetoed and turned over. So then that's good. We won. Well, no, we didn't, because now state to state, there are a lot of things happening. And, because my wife works in the medical industry, I know that there are medical professionals that are like, well, we didn't know what to do because the law's not clear. No, you're making a political stance. You're becoming an activist as a doctor instead of taking care of your patient. You're trying to make a stand and make things uncomfortable and make the news cycle, to make your point, which is not okay. But that's political, right? There are things that we need to do politically to step into some of these situations. But as the church, then what do we do? I'm going to throw this to Danny. Danny, as believers, when we see these areas of complexity, when we see that it's not just numbers on a tally, it's real people facing real difficulty, whether it's poverty, whether it's they've survived rape and they're going to have this child, and they're trying to do what's right, but they're facing overwhelming odds, or you feel like you don't have a place in the church because it seems like the whole world has suddenly turned against me and who I am, and in the LGBT BTQ community or whatever, wherever you stand, the church needs to be a place where everyone's welcome. So how do we toe the line of what's right to preserve what's good, and also humble ourselves to hear people and to step into hurt and to step into whatever comes next? Because clearly unity should be the goal, in whatever way it can be. And I'm not so optimistic to think that this sort of animosity just goes away in the next 2 years or 4 years or whatever. But what does it look like on the ground as believers who, we call this podcast Theodotos. Nobody's claiming to be, the biblical scholar here. But what does it look like to love people well and to shine the light of the gospel into these sorts of situations?
Well, we kind of taught in our care group that it's a long game. You're not going to talk to somebody one time, or take them out for coffee and convince them. It's a long game that you don't always win, or it's heartbreaking sometimes. But to even get that started, you have to listen, and you have to listen to hear and not listen to give a response. And what I mean by that is, when somebody's telling you their problems and what's going on in their life, and you don't respond with, well, if you would have done this, if you would have, if your walk with God would have been, stronger, you listen, and you love with any amount of empathy that you can give, and you try to start building a foundation for them to come back. And it's a ground war. It's person to person. It can't be done 100% from a pulpit, one guy preaching to 2,000 people. It's got to be Christians who are concerned about people, and you've got to care more about their relationship with Christ than you are about how they voted, or what they did last weekend. And if you can't get past that, then you're not going to be effective in winning souls for the kingdom.
And
First of
don't
all,
you think some of that has to start
I've told,
staying constantly aware of our own fallenness and brokenness? And I can't think too highly of myself. I know me too well. I know what God's poured out his grace upon in my life. I know how undeserving I am of what I have and what good things he's done for me. So even when I strongly dislike where somebody's standing, it's really hard for me to forget that sometimes I'm standing in a really bad spot from where God's sitting, and he loves me anyway, and he makes a way for me and opens his arms for me anyway. That's a hard place to live, especially as human beings, because we have that selfish inclination to want to run things our way and do things our way. But I think as long as we're putting God first and remembering what he's done in our lives, it makes it easier when we're confronted with that sort of antagonism that we're seeing all around us right now, whether it's politics or anything else.
yeah, 100%. And I'm fond of telling my kids, like, life's full of choices. Your life is the decisions that you make every day. It doesn't mean if you make a bad decision that your life's over. Video game, game over. No, but God gave us a blueprint, and we have just destroyed it. The churches were supposed to take care of the widows and the orphans and feed the hungry. And we've gotten out of that business and gave it to the government, or the government took it over. And, you used the word complicated earlier. It's a very complicated mess of the church giving up on certain aspects of what they're called to do.
Yeah.
And ceded ground. Yes. And it's a ground war now to get some of it back. And, it's a daily fight, and, it has to be an attitude of, I don't have all the answers. And like you said, I don't deserve the grace that I've been given. And I don't exactly know where you're coming from with, the way you're living your life, but I know that there's hope for you. And I'd like to share that with you and start planting those seeds and playing that long game and investing in people. Relationships these days are so shallow and short, and we don't want to get dirty. We don't want to invest too much time in people because they'll ghost us, or
we even take phone calls,
whatever.
We spend our time communicating, text or social media.
Yeah,
we've got no real skin.
You just send them to voicemail. I do it to Rob all the time.
We can excuse that treatment of Rob.
Why won't you answer my calls?
But it is an investment, and it can be tiring, and you've got to guard your own. There's so many facets to it. You've got to guard your own walk so you don't get, what's the Bible say, thrown in with certain people who aren't living like they should.
Bad company,
you're trying to reach
good
them.
Character.
Yeah. And
that kind of leads into kind of on the same subject. I just had this similar question of, how do we live as Christians post 2024 election? How can we approach the marketplace of ideas and present ideas to unify around? Because we have, like Jeff was saying, I mean, and you, Danny, we're so divided. The issues seem so polarized. So how, as Christians, as a church, how do we do better? How do we unify around some truths that can unify believers, non-believers. Dale, Danny, jump in on that. What can we do better as a church to be in these public spheres, whether that's social media, whether that's person to person? Yeah, definitely some, what you were saying about recognizing our own depravity, our own need for grace, our own, the fact that we are recipients of an undeserved favor from God. So how do we turn that outward? Like Danny, you were talking about, listening to people. I like that. So individually and corporately as a church model, how do we do better? How do we get into the marketplace of ideas with people and find things to unify around?
Go ahead, Dale.
Either one
You're
of
all
you.
over that one. You got the answers.
Well, all I will do is share what's going on in my own heart for a few minutes.
Sounds good.
How about that? I was on a school bus with just 5 kids, a little shuttle that I do. And one of the boys got on. We're talking elementary, so they're not more than 4th grade. Okay. He mentioned something about gay and it being wrong. And I heard probably three of the 5, maybe the 1st grader didn't mention anything, say out loud, there's nothing wrong with that. It was fascinating because they had a little dialogue and he was talking about, without trying to get crude, what was happening. He was personally offended about what that was as a young boy because he probably heard about it or something. I don't know. I'm sitting there driving a school bus going, what do I do in this situation? How do I say anything? He's touching on a very, very interesting subject that when you break it down to its most crudest form, we don't want to talk about these things, right? As Christians at the church, we don't want to talk about what it is. It's fascinating. I'm reading in Peter, and Peter's saying, add to your faith virtue, your virtue knowledge, right? Self-control, all these things with diligence. Later I'm reading through the whole chapter, all of 2 Peter, and he goes to Lot, and he talks about how Lot's righteous soul was vexed. And I think of my own self in this culture then, and I go, am I vexed by this culture? What do I do as far as like to have a righteous heart for God and not be affected by what's going on around me and the compromise? And so this is not a crusade, but I just want to tell you what I was thinking. Sometimes as a Christian, I think we're left out there because if we go to the corporate gathering, what are they saying about these things? Are they saying anything? If they're not saying anything, how do we as believers individually engaging these folks in loving relationships like Danny's talking about, trying to help them? How do we defend a foundation that says our origins and purpose, sin is corrupted, right? Forgiveness and power to change. Those 4 things, that makes up the gospel, correct? I struggle to have that in my own life. So it's fascinating because we don't want to necessarily bash on the gay thing, but it is fascinating. If someone's coming to our church to hear truth, are we presenting it? And this is where it took me. And you can edit me out, okay? Because I don't want to be in a bad place,
put a
Jeff,
disclaimer
about any of this. But it took me to Paul. This is interesting. I went to Paul in chapter 1 of Romans. Paul had never been to Rome. Now, this is in the context of what I'm sharing about being on the school bus, right? And what our culture says about these things. Paul had never been to Rome. In fact, he fascinatingly says, I desired to be there and I haven't been able to get there. And what does he go into right away? He goes into some of these matters that we are dealing with in our culture, exposed face on with us. He talks about these things, and he talks about how they are judgment. And I wonder if I think that way. Is my compassion generated through the righteousness of God and my desire for him to be glorified to that point where I go, you're in judgment. I'm in judgment when I sin, right? So it's just fascinating because Paul went right to it and you go, he'd never been there. Is Paul a seeker-friendly church? He'd never been to Rome, and that's where he went. He presented if you're coming here to hear this, this is what you're going to hear. So again, not to find fault with the church at all, but I wonder about some of these matters, how we don't talk about them in the corporate setting. And why don't we talk about them in the corporate setting? So that when we individually engage folks, we can talk about sin and how to redeem, how to be redeemed. Instead, we're out there on our own sometimes feeling like we're the only one defending the idea. No, that's wrong. There's all kinds of reasons why it's wrong. By design, right? So that's a long answer, but I think in some ways we have to go back to the remembrance. If you understand what I was saying before, go back to the foundation. Because that's where revival and renewal will come from. It's not going to come from us being people that are not in unity with Christ. First, the unity of Christ needs in our body of Christ. In my own heart, I need to get my flesh in subjection and then honor the fact that God wants me to live a holy life in front of other people. And they may not like that.
Right.
I can see compassionate.
I love that idea of remembrance. And that's like a huge principle for me. I mean, I don't know how many times in the Old Testament, the idea of remember what God has done for you. And Dale, I know we've talked about this and you've said before how the feasts and tabernacles and Sabbaths, those were all remembrances of what God had done, leading the people out of Israel, the Passover, all of the different feasts, tabernacles, Sabbaths, they all had significance, and they were all there to help God's people stay in that remembrance of who he is, of his goodness, of his power, of his authority, of his involvement in our lives. So that it's a looking back, but it's also a forging ahead into a faith and a hope that we have in Christ. It's not looking back at, a better day, a black and white, but it's that remembrance. So let me
just real quick,
take
though,
that. Yes, absolutely.
It's just something real quick. It's kind of startling when I sat here with my Bible and I thought about that conversation I had. Well, I wasn't in the conversation. I was listening with those young people. And it, to me, then makes me go, the church really needs to understand how impactful this subject is on our culture. We read that book by Truman, and he's talking about the sexual revolution. He's talking about the restructuring of ideas and values. These things ought to be forefront in our minds because it really is important that we have to fight these difficult battles with love, but we have to fight, don't we? Like you said, Danny, it's a ground war, and we need to figure out how to do it in love, and we've got to accept the fact that by holding a standard, sometimes people are just going to hate us for that reason.
Well, exactly. And if you love someone, you're truthful with them. You don't tell them the stove's not hot. Go ahead and put your hand on it when it's fire red. There's a left hand and a right hand. There's grace and there's truth. And if a father disciplines his child because he loves him, not because he hates him. If he hated him, he would never discipline him.
Sometimes you stand against someone. Sometimes you stand against them for their sake. You're becoming a wall or a guardrail because of your love for them. You're saying no because you love it. You're opposing them for their sake, and I think we lose sight of that sometimes as the church. Kind of like Dale said, that speaker friendly kind of thing. Sometimes we turn down the volume on things that are uncomfortable because we want to keep things nice and friendly and fun and safe and all the silly words that we like to use, but there's nothing safe about the gospel, and there's nothing safe about serving Christ. There's nobody in Scripture who serves Christ for whom things end well on this side of things, right? So, you know, I think we need to proclaim the gospel boldly, and sometimes that means stepping on toes. It just does.
He's on the
Sorry, I
move.
got to switch. I got to
where are we
switch
going,
rooms, and
Danny?
my phone's
You're
going to
okay.
die if I don't switch rooms. So
Well,
If I hear an echo, we're
Well-
hanging up on you.
Rob, we're running short on time anyway. Do you have a final question? Wrap this up.
Okay. Yeah. Let me move to sort of an inevitable here. So, let's talk about meltdowns and victory dances, if you don't mind.
Which one do you want me to have?
So again, if you're tuned into this, I don't do podcasts and stuff. I'm more of a YouTube kind of guy. I don't know how to say it. If you're watching this, if you're listening to this, if you're tuned into this, so it's probably not hard to figure out that we're a bunch of conservative Christian people here, and I'm going to have to admit, post-election, watching some of the meltdowns from the left, I did chuckle. I did have my chuckles with some of the insane, uncoupled, just hair pulling out meltdowns of people. And some of the fallout from this election is poignant. What's a good word? It's not something that you can't take notice of. For instance, CBS has decoupled from MSNBC, and Comcast has dropped MSNBC, and Morning Joe, who has labeled Trump and people that voted for him and whatever, Hitler, Nazis, yada yada. So you have all this kind of nonsense going on, and at the same time, it's like, so one of the things that I'm wrestling with. So again, like I said, I had some chuckles over the meltdowns, but at the same time, I am compassionate as I'm watching these people, and I'm going, oh my gosh, they're really actually in distress. I mean, it's not funny. It's funny in a sense, in a very political sense of being able to breathe easier as you're seeing a result that you're hopeful is going to have a good outcome for everybody. But at the same time, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm watching some of these people and I'm just going, that is very troubling. And one of the things to me that is so sad and frustrating about that is that these people, a lot of them, and a lot on the left and the right, this is not just one side or the other, but there's people are being sold a bill of goods, kind of, Danny, to your point, what you're talking about is like, these focus groups where they're finding out what is moving people. And I think we talked about this in our last episode, that it used to be that people would look at the ticket, they would look at the, who's representing what changes are they saying that they're going to make when they get into office. We used to judge based on, those potential outcomes, and it's become so emotional and emotionally charged, and media and government are very good at dividing and conquering, trying to make people angry at each other, dividing class and race and, social dynamics. And so, I'm wrestling with that as, coming off the election. And there's a lot of, unfortunately, there are a lot of, conservative outlets on YouTube and other sources that are just reveling and doing victory dances and laughing at the distress of the people that feel like they've lost something, whether we consider that unhinged and unrealistic as to why they're unhinged. And I think there's probably people on the left that are watching some of those meltdowns too, and saying, "Oh my gosh, that's ridiculous," and maybe even hilarious. It's a sad situation, I think, overall. But then there's this other side that says this is absolutely right, that some of these things should be happening. MSNBC has been peddling lies for however long. Donald Trump gets elected to office, and the cast of Morning Joe ends up at Mar-a-Lago with Donald Trump. And it's just like a total betrayal. That they called the man Hitler, and now they're like, you know what? He's not such a bad guy. We're about to lose our ratings and our station and our paycheck, so we'll cozy up to him. Come on. So, I mean, at some level, there is a fight, and we're not, like Dale, to your point, we may be offensive. People may be offended, but some of this is, like, rightly so, that people will be offended, and, news outlets will be potentially canceled from the public, and rightly so. So what do you guys think about that going forward? I mean, it's, if we're saying we're doing battle, and we believe that God is in it, we're not always going to get the favorable, relational, happy outcome necessarily. And sorry about the long intro into this question, comment as you will, but we have forefathers that built in a toolbox for us. And this actually may be a conversation for another time, because we are running short on time, whatever. But Second Amendment, and if you can keep it, are things that our forefathers wrote into this republic. And so I'll leave it there and kind of let people comment as we close out here. But as loving Christians who are trying to primarily share the gospel and not be politicians, what does that landscape look like to us going forward, as far as a fight, and as far as collateral damage, fallout from, sorry you lost your station?
I think it's, like any good coach would say, we're going to celebrate tonight, but we've got work to do to get ready for the game next week. We have a unique opportunity to do some real positive things for our country, and the benefit of that is for everybody, and it may change some people's minds on how bad they thought things were going to be. As far as offending people and trying to invest in people to win them over, I'm reminded of a story in just a verse or two, and I can't remember where it is. I think it's in Luke, where Jesus says, if you go into a town you're not received, head on out.
Shake the dust off your feet.
Shake the dust off and get on out. It's a fine line. I had this conversation with a small group that I was in several years ago, where Christianity was, modern church is trying to make it like a feel-good movement. And I just said to everybody, in the group one night, do you all think that everybody's going to heaven? Because that's not biblical at all. That's not, it's the desire that everybody does, but that's not reality. And so I think we need to, seek discernment on how we use our finite resources. Um, we certainly need to help people and invest in people and start those relationships. But we also need discernment on when am I being dragged down trying to save a drowning person? When do I need to shake the dust off and go? So that's an important, prayer in my life is send people my way, give me discernment to know who I can reach and who's trying to bring destruction my way.
Huh.
I like the words of Barack Obama. Elections have consequences. And I don't think that we have to gloat on that. I think that we have to act in such a way that we have been saying we will. And that is that we care for everybody and we want the best for our country. And that doesn't mean every individual that wants their little way. It's not going to happen. I hope that the Trump administration has the grace of God to follow through on the things they promised to the people that voted for them. I know that there are people using the words of our friend Rush Limbaugh right now, and they're saying, I hope that he fails. Well, when he said that about Obama, they had a cow. But we know that they feel that way, and that's okay. I don't think that has to affect the way I love them. And I pray for my own heart that I am a gracious person in victory, right? That but that when it comes to it, when our legislation is able to put in law things that they wanted to execute through administrative state, when the will of the people is given, that they have to accept that this is the country that they live in. And we've heard a lot of them threaten that they want to leave. Well, we've all felt that way too. Maybe I have, at least in the past, when I've seen things happening in my country, to go, where am I going to go if they dictate my thoughts? So we're talking about behavior on our side, and I believe that with all my heart, not what they think. There's another side that believes that they can control what I think. That, again, I'm sorry for being alarmist. You can edit that out. But that's how I think we really have come up against an evil force that is godless in a lot of ways. And it has been a force that not that, again, I know this is a political discussion, but the foundation of our country gave people liberty to make their own decisions about things. And in society, we made laws based on the will of the people. So I think that we're closer to that now than we were before. That's what I believe. And I'm sorry that people are upset about that. Let's prove that they're right. That's true, that we're not dictators. I have no desire to dictate to anyone. I know that I have a God, though, that has dictated a book that tells them how they should approach him and their own moral life. So that's in there. That's difficult.
Yeah.
We all agree on that. It's hard to see that book and look in there and see my own heart. That's how I speak to
Absolutely.
that. I'm perfect. I don't have an opportunity anyway to say to anyone, I got this down. I look in there and I see my faults and I go, I need a Jesus that loves me and has mercy for me every day.
Amen. I think that's a good place to end this episode. We want to thank Danny Short and Dale Hopp for joining us for this episode. Great talking to both of you. Just as much fun as I thought it was going to be. Well, I'm sure we'll have you back on before too long, maybe with a completely different topic. Who knows? But I know I speak for Rob when we thank you guys for giving us your time and your energy tonight. And as for the rest of you listening to the podcast, we'll be right back with our final thought.
And now here's Jeff Lamar with this week's final thoughts.
Those of us who are followers of the way, who wear Christ's name as a badge of position and authority we are wholly unworthy of, now find ourselves faced with two paths forward. We can be swept up in the insidious us versus them attitude so pervasive in modern society, ostracizing our neighbors and families over politics, left, right, or center. Or we can live sacrificial lives positioning ourselves to be unoffendable, absorbing the blows to our egos, of course, not the bodily torture the Lord endured, for the sake of God's overwhelming love for the broken. This is not an easy work we are called to, made difficult not just by the fallen state of the world and the corruption we find within it, but by our own malignant natures, always seeking to silence mercy with judgment or grace with control. Matthew 5 calls us to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us, but our flesh finds great satisfaction in vengeance and condemnation. The call to fight rings loud in our ears, while the Holy Spirit often speaks in whispers. So, what do we do, brothers? How do we live the life God calls us to? Well, we start by remembering that we're not citizens of this world and its darkness, but of a kingdom built on a firm foundation of the living Word. That this work we've been assigned, being salt and light, preserving what is good and holding back the darkness, is a temporary assignment whose ultimate goal is to reach the lost with the gospel that has called us out of that same destruction, out of death, and into his life. If this friction is a temporary discomfort, we can endure it. And in enduring it, the Holy Spirit will strengthen our resolve, deepen our trust in him, and raise us up into an unoffendable people, marked by their grace and love for their fellow human beings. Colossians 3:12-13 says, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves in compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you." Our enemies are not political. Our enemy, the one who lies to us like no other, is the man in the mirror. That's who Christ came to save us from. That's where the work needs to happen. Vote your conscience. Absolutely. Preserve what is good with your speech and your actions. But lead with love. Let compassion and an understanding of your own wickedness soften your tongue. Be gracious and merciful to those who don't think like you or want what you want, because they too are welcome in the arms of God. Until next time, grace and peace.